This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is James Arnold Taylor, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi. I have a good feeling about this.
Joining us today for a cup of coffee to talk about the 4th episode in Season 2 of The Bad Batch. The episode is titled Faster, and we've got 2 fast and furious co-hosts on the show, 2 returning guests that you will certainly know and love. First, we're going to bring in from Marvin Dog Media, Talking Toys with Taylor and Jeff, Star Wars Splash Page, and it's the joke every time, but literally this guy's resume has as many letters in it as the Old Testament. Jeff McGee.
Hooray! I can only hope that the next episode is titled More Intense.
Nice, very good Star Wars reference there. Well, good to have you back on the show, man.
Great to be here, and great to talk to you and Mason for the first time. This is fun. This is awesome.
Yes. Well,
sorry, I stole your thunder.
That's all right. We know because we're talking Bad Batch, so you got to have an expert on the show that knows and loves these characters as much as anyone. This is, of course, my son, Mason Zehr. Mason, welcome back to Coffee with Kenobi.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Well, it is great to see you. I feel like I just saw you a few seconds ago, huh? Maybe. All right, let's do what we normally do. We're gonna save our letter grade for the end of the episode. So the entire conversation will be just kind of establishing the rubric of how we think we're going to grade this particular one. So Mason, I'm going to start with you. Give me one word to describe the episode, and then your overall thoughts on the episode in general.
I say it was surprising.
Okay.
Because I think, especially like when Tech raced, when like Teo got ran over, and like it looked like Malegi, he sent the racer to go smash into him. I don't think any of us expected that.
Okay. And the whole thing was surprising. I like it. Very good. Good start. Count Jeff McGee, what about you?
If I were to use one word, fun. This episode was a lot of fun, especially as a counterpoint to last week's episode, which was very dark and intense. This was a nice like breather, which I really, really enjoyed. Spoiler alert. But yeah, fun is the word I would use to describe this one.
Excellent. Well, I was just telling Mason before we turn on our mics that I never know what word I'm going to use until I start talking. But I think I would use the word for this one. I would say slick. This was a pretty slick episode. Yeah. It was fast. It had some fun little surprises. It had a lot of slicksters running around doing unsavory things to try for the cost of the almighty buck, or credit, as it were, in the world of Star Wars. But yeah, so let's talk about this overall. Basically, Sid takes Wrecker. Yes, I was thinking muscles because that's what she always calls him. Wrecker and Tech and Omega, of course, go with her because it's pretty rare for Sid to go on a mission. But whenever Sid goes on a mission, there's something personal about it. We're not really going to go linearly or in order of the story per se. We can go anywhere we want with this. But Jeff, where would you like to start the conversation?
Well, I don't want to get too far into the episode, but I loved the new characters that we met, that we got to spend a lot of time with. Teo and what was the other?
Malegi is the boss alien.
Mm-hmm. Loved both of those characters for different reasons. Teo was hilarious, and they used him in just the right amount. Because that character, if you shaped a whole episode around that character, he could get really exhausting. But the way they used him in this episode was perfect. And Malegi giving us a glimpse into who he is. We think he's just going to be your standard garden variety villain, and if at the very end he demonstrates some depth. So I'm really hoping that we get to spend more time with him as the season and series progresses.
Mason, what about you? Do you want to expand on that? I know you've got some trivia for us about Teo.
Ooh.
Do you know who the voice is of Teo?
I thought the whole way through, I thought it was Kevin McDonald from Kids in the Hall. He was my favorite one of the Kids in the Hall. The dark-haired, curly-haired guy. I don't know if you ever watched Kids in the Hall, Dan.
I know what you're talking about, but that's not who it is. I'll give the real name, and then Mason, you share the name of the character that he plays. So you want to go first, Mason?
No, you.
Okay, Ben Schwartz
Sonic.
is Sonic. Sonic the Hedgehog from the newer films. And Ben Schwartz, of course, is in a lot of films. He's a very, very funny actor. And when you know that it's him, the cadence is there. And did you hear the voice of Malegi is? Jeff, I'm excited. I get to tell you this.
I know.
Do you know? You do know?
I know. Yes.
Okay, go ahead. Tell us.
That was the great Ernie Hudson, but I didn't know until I looked it up. I would have sworn it was someone like Keith David, because it's when you know it's Ernie Hudson, you can hear it. You can hear the voice, but he's definitely doing a character voice here.
Or like it's modulated or something.
Yeah.
Ernie Hudson, of course, most famous to us because he is one of the original Ghostbusters.
Yep.
So
he's also Gus's dad on Psych in one episode of Psych.
Well, there you go. I've never seen.
He took over from Keith David, which is funny. Keith David was no. It was Ernie Hudson first, and then Keith David. So that's why I kind of get them confused in my head sometimes.
Interesting. By the way, you haven't lived until you've podcasted with Jeff McGee. And he's using a green screen, and sometimes it just looks like he's a floating head. I really like that.
I am a floating head. A little known fact about me.
Yes. I can't wait for the Jeff McGee balloon. Now, let's talk about the episode more specifically. The new characters are interesting. You mentioned Teo. Teo is the racer for Sid. Teo talks about himself in the third person, and I found Teo to be funny, but I found him to be really grating and annoying. And I know that was the purpose, but he's very, very effective. He's very, very funny. Mason, what do you think about Teo?
I think like the actor, he acted like Sonic, like does in the movies. And like you said, he's braggy.
Mm-hmm.
But if, like you said, he's like The Rock, so he has rights.
That's true. He's a very talented racer. We're talking about the race. This thing, obviously, purposefully, I shouldn't say obviously, but it's fair to assume that this was very much inspired by the pod racing on Tatooine. The planet here is Safa. Toma. It's the planet or the spaceport. It's not really clear if it's the planet or the name of the spaceport, but Safa Toma, Safatoma. And it's some of the racetrack itself, there are different tunnels that the racers go through. You're allowed to use any means necessary. Cheating is just a normal part of life. It's kind of like a Thunderdome situation.
It's Mario Kart.
Yeah.
It is. It's very much Mario Kart. It would be a blast to play. The tunnels themselves look like the tunnels on Coruscant when Obi-Wan and Anakin are chasing after the assassin in Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. There's a lot of fun callbacks there, and I will say from the get-go, and I think Mason, you'll agree with me, I like this episode much more the second time I watched it than the first time I watched it, and I think a lot of that is because the Solitary Clone, the last episode, which was primarily all about Crosshair and to some degree Commander Cody, they're just very, very different in tone, but this was a welcome one.
No, I'm with you 100%. As far as your take on Teo, I get what you're saying, and that's why I said if they had used him any more in the episode, it would have really gotten on my nerves. But I think they used him just the right amount. And at one point, when he got blown apart and Tech is putting him back together, he says at one point, he's talking, he goes, "I'm ready to, where are my arms and legs?" And that line reading, I ran it back 3 times and laughed every single time. The way he said it was just hysterical. And this was like the breath after you've taken a deep dive for the last episode, deep down into the dark water. This is coming up for air, and this is the sunlight hitting you and everything. This was everything we needed after last week's episode.
Agreed.
I've only had a chance to watch it once, but I am looking forward to seeing it again. So Mason, Dan mentioned that you guys had watched it a couple of times. Was there anything that you noticed the second time that you missed the first time around?
When Teo says, "Let me ignore that obvious question." Yes, I can. About winning.
About if you can win the race. I found it awesome. More funny the second time through, I think. And I also noticed, by the way, and I think you talked about this when you and I were texting back and forth, Jeff, but the coloration on the animation is just absolutely gorgeous.
This season, I don't know, last season was fine, but this season, especially these last 2 episodes, for whatever reason, have really just hit my sweet spot as far as color, saturation, depth, everything. Lighting. The one of the last scenes near the end when Sid and Malegi are sitting in his back room and he's trying to get her to to share a drink with him. The use of shadow in that and the way they had the shadows falling across each of them and then peering into the light. The way it was animated was just phenomenal, and the fact that we're getting this on a weekly television series just blows my mind. The quality of the animation that we're seeing.
It's really, really cool. Mason, did you notice how good it looked too, especially on our TV downstairs?
Yes, it looked very nice.
Yes, it did. Mason, you want to talk about Malegi a little bit? Tell me what you think about Malegi and his role.
Like in my notes, because in the beginning when they mentioned his name, I put in parentheses, I put bad guy. And then
Yes.
at the end, I think he showed some resilience.
Oh, tell me about that.
Because Jet Venom is grabbing his gun that he's about to grab his gun that's on the table. And he puts his hand on his hand, like, no, don't. And he says, Sid isn't loyal, watch your backs.
Yeah. So he definitely appears to be the bad guy, right? I mean, there's no question about that.
Mm-hmm. But
since he's a gangster, gangsters usually make bets or hedge their bets on some sort of a gamble that they're almost guaranteed to win and profit at a very high degree. And that's certainly the way Hollywood has portrayed it for forever, since the 30s. But in this one, so here's what happens. So Teo, the braggy racer, he races against Jet Venom. And then Jet Venom cheats, because everybody cheats in these Sapatoma races. And
I was actually going to ask you guys what you thought about that. Did they cheat? If it's pretty much anything goes, did they cheat?
I like that question. Mason, what do you think?
it's hard to tell, but I think since the only time they did it was in the tunnel and no one could see, I'd say
so that's a very good discrepancy there, because it appears that you can have weapons on these racers, right? You can do all these things. You're obviously running into people. They do that in the pod races too. But you're right, because it's in the tunnels, it makes you wonder if there is any kind of guidelines, rules or not. My guess is no, but the fact that they only do it in the tunnels is a really astute, a really, really smart observation. But
yeah,
how can you cheat in a race with no rules?
whoever said it never had no rules.
You're right. It doesn't specifically state that, but we make a lot of assumptions. It seems that Tech and Wrecker make a lot of assumptions. Wrecker, by the way, he's so fun in this episode. Wrecker is someone that could be very easy to just sort of ignore because he's strong. He talks different than the rest of them. He's whatever, but he's terrific comedic relief. I mean, at the end he says, "I thought you were a goner," once Tech actually wins the race, and that actually made me chuckle quite a bit. But I really like Wrecker's role in this. Is he's almost like the calm in spite of all this craziness going on.
He really is. You know, I was a little bummed out when I found out that we weren't going to get the whole batch in this one. After the last episode, we didn't get any of them. But then it's okay, because Tech and Wrecker are actually my favorite characters on the show. Of all of the cast, they are my favorites because of that. Wrecker is one of those characters that could, like you said, very easily just be this really two-dimensional, kind of just a bull in a china closet, but he's not. He actually has some depth to him, and Tech is the same way. Tech has this, sort of very dry sense of humor and is very rarely wrong. So it's okay for him to be kind of like with Teo. It's okay for Tech to be a little full of himself when he backs it up. And so these two together, this is a pairing that I can get behind as often as they want to do it.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
So the race, they called it riot racing, right? Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I can't wait for the Star Wars riot racing video game.
Or at least an app, like some sort of a racing app.
Right.
Especially when those little barricades just pop up randomly, those little doors. That's straight out of Mario Kart. Straight out of Mario Kart. Straight out of Sapatoma. All right, so Malegi, let's go back and talk about Malegi. We're all over the place, but so's the episode. Malegi and Sid, like, it's very clear that Malegi and Sid have some sort of a history together. I obviously they have business dealings. They're friends. Maybe they were friendly, if you understand what I mean. I don't know that for sure. What I know is that the bet again is that who's going to win, Sid's racer, who is Teo, or is Jet Venom Melegi's racer going to? And then he destroys Teo's racer.
No.
Teo is destroyed. And then, so now it's like, all right, the bet, you've lost the bet. You owe us this money. And then she says, all right, I'm good for it. You're going to have to give me a little time, which is the classic thing you say when you can't pay a gangster.
Checks in the mail.
That's right. Checks in the mail. I like to write my checks on the glove box. Isn't that what they say in Blues Brothers?
Yes.
And then
I have to get a pencil and we both sign it.
So then Omega has this idea. Omega, again, the heart and soul of the team. She says, why don't we race again? And if you win, Melegi, we'll pay you double. But if we win, we get Sid back. Because he's going to take Sid and basically kidnap her because that's just part of their code. And Sid goes along eventually willingly. And so their plan is to rebuild Teo and then to get the racer and then win the race. And Teo is so confident that he's going to win again. Every time Sid tries, or Tech tries to give Teo advice, Teo dismisses it so readily and usually ends up with him getting destroyed. It's pretty funny. I mean, there's some great classic sort of, would you call it slapsticky, Jeff?
It's not so much slapstick because there's not as much physical humor as I would say. It's more screwball because everything's kind of coming fast and furious, and there's a lot of wordplay in there as well. And going back to what you were talking about Omega, basically saying double or nothing. You caught that she learned that earlier in the episode, and I thought that was a really good setup and payoff from a screenwriting standpoint.
Agreed.
I had that in my notes.
Mason, you were going to say something, buddy?
I liked when the alien guy in the audience got shot, and then right after the guy on the comm said, "You are responsible. If you get hurt, die."
Yeah. Yeah.
Hurt or killed, yeah. And when that happened, I was thinking, oh, this is a really cool shot. I love seeing all these creatures. Oh, that guy's dead.
Yeah, like the whole goes through and he doesn't realize that all he just goes collapse. I mean, that is sort of slapsticky.
That is very slapsticky, yeah.
That was one of my favorite parts. So that's the thing. They use death or that kind of or violence as as a means of humor. But they also balance it so beautifully because you still get the sense of, while Sid may not necessarily be in danger, her freedom is in danger. So that is kind of what we're going at. I guess let's talk about Tech. You said Tech is one of your favorites, Mason. I know you really like Tech a lot too. How would you rate? Did someone just do applause? I'd never seen that before. That was Mason. How would you rate? Tech is someone, again, that could also be one-dimensional. But this season, although it's very young, I feel like a lot of the episodes have been really focused on him. And I'm glad for that. What do you two think?
Yeah, I did think it was interesting that he played a big role in the first couple of episodes when they were trying to hijack the shipment or whatever it was. And I'm here for it because he, like I said, he's a really interesting character, and I think of everyone in the crew, he is the one that is most capable in almost every area. He may not be as strong as Wrecker, but he's still got a decent amount of strength, as a clone soldier. Mm-hmm. And I feel like if it were me, I would rather have him leading the group if it's me than anybody else. And so I'm here for it. I would be fine with, like I said, I would be fine with Tech and Wrecker on the road again for 6 episodes. I could watch that. So I'm here for it.
Mason, what do you like about Tech in this episode?
I liked when Wrecker said, "You're in last place," and Tech said, "No." And Tech said, "It's called strategy," and he said, "No, it's called losing."
I wrote that down as one of my favorite quotes. That's going to be in the top 5 for sure. The thing about Tech that I like that I think, so his personality is so quirky, he could be off-putting, but he's not. He has zero ego. He has zero sense of irony, but the way it's played out, he's not cold and emotionless. Like, he actually cares. Like, he takes the bet. He wants to help Sid. He's always very loyal to his team. It's clearly something of a mentor to Omega, but the fact that he has zero pretense about him, and he uses, instead of using, Teo's arrogance and skill and just relying on speed and flash, Tech just wants to analyze it, and he checks out the patterns of the racers. He takes risks on the course because he thinks that's the most probable one. He eliminates his weapons and gets rid of them so he will be faster and more maneuverable. He's smart. He's confident. There's never a single time where I thought Tech's a little bit worried. But it wasn't artificial. Just felt like he's so smart that he will just outthink this whole thing. And to him, this is what you do. And I really like that example.
Yeah, well, I agree. He's all about preparation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so important because he may not have Teo's innate skill, so he makes up for it with brain power, really, and preparation. And I think it's a good message for younger viewers, and it's in keeping with his character.
Agreed. So what else have we talked at the end? We learned something about Sid, or maybe we don't learn something about Sid. Mason, talk to us if you can, if you wrote something down, or if you just from your memory, which is pretty impressive. Hashtag bias dad. Tell me what we learned about Sid at the end, and you talked about the warning earlier with Malegi, but what do you think Sid cares about? Does she care about the Bad Batch? Does she only care about herself, or is there more to it than all of that?
I think there's more to it. She cares about herself and money.
Mm-hmm. Think she cares about the Bad Batch at all?
Like 1%.
1%. Well, if that is true,
more Omega than all of them.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah,
when Omega puts her neck out halfway through, Sid looks at Omega with this sense of like love and pride, which we saw in the first season. I can't remember the specific name of the episode, but it's the one where they had to go through those tunnels on those like train cars that are like from Indiana Jones and a Temple of Doom, those little mine cars. And she does a lot of things to try to help Omega. And we see that shows up there as well. But Malegi at the end says, your loyalty is admirable. And you can tell that Malegi, by the way, appears to be a person of his word. Like he doesn't let, like you said, Mason, doesn't let Jet Venom blast them. He lets them leave. A deal's a deal. He doesn't seem to be upset or sore about it in any way, shape, or form. And he says, your loyalty, I don't know if he says impressive or what the exact wording is, but then he says, basically, Sid is going to turn on you. Do you think what do you think? Do you think that's true, Mason?
Yes, I do.
I think it says something about Sid that we're quicker to believe Malegi than we are Sid.
That's a good point.
I think up to this point, it would be absolutely true. But I'd like to think that after this happens and as the series goes on, she's going to grow a greater amount of affection for the crew and respect for the crew, and maybe would not be as easy to sell them down the river. Because she reminds me of Hondo Anaka, who was my favorite new character from the Clone Wars.
I love Hondo.
Yeah. And that Sid reminds me of them. And Malegi, to begin with, he sort of toes that line as well. You guys talked about he's a man of his word, even if he's unscrupulous. If he tells you he's going to do something, he's going to do it. He'll stick by it. And so that makes him a far more interesting character to me than if he was just a simple, normal villain. And it's the same way with Sid. You never know which side she's going to land on. And those are always the most interesting characters. Sort of like, what was the character on Deep Space Nine?
I've not seen a single episode of that, so I wouldn't be able to help you.
Wow. Okay, that's my favorite Star Trek. Anybody who watches it knows what I'm talking about. He's the tailor that's on board. You find out, spoilers, during the series that he's like a double agent. or was a spy, and you just never know where he's going to land. They both remind me of that, and those are always my favorite characters because you can never anticipate what they're going to do, and that's kind of Sid to me.
Okay, that's fair. The Hondo Anaka comparison is good. The difference to me is that with Hondo, while he is an equal opportunity offender and he'll always do what benefits him until the end of Rebels, I think at least with Hondo, if Hondo says something, it's like he's not going to lie to your face. He's just going to do it whether you like it or not. Whereas Sid, I feel like I don't know. There's something about Sid. I hope we don't get a lot of focus on Sid because she's beginning to frustrate me. And I think that we've seen this with Echo, as Echo has said repeatedly in the early parts of the season. Basically, why are we doing this? There are people that need our help. Sid does not seem to have any altruism about her. Let's just hope that she keeps the Bad Batch's secret. We don't speculate on the show anyway, but it introduces some interesting things. So I think I'm about ready to give my letter grade. I mean, there's not a ton to talk about in this episode. It's very entertaining. I had some fun little moments, some funny parts. But is there anything, Mason, on your notes that we didn't talk about or things you want to bring up that we have not yet addressed?
The racing reminded me of Quidditch.
Oh, tell me why.
No rules. Like in Quidditch, there's beaters which hit the bludgers.
Mm-hmm.
Like so in the tunnels, how they were attacking. Yes,
that is a good comparison. Anything else that you want to talk about, or do you feel ready to give a letter grade?
I think I'm ready.
Okay, Jeff, what about you?
The only things that we didn't discuss were there was a lot of snarky humor in this episode that I really liked. Yes. And maybe my favorite moment, and I had to run it back to make sure I saw what I saw, was when the one racer crashes into the Batches, their spot there, and takes out Teo. The guy that was driving it gets out. He looks at the Batch and just shrugs as he's walking off. So yeah, just a slight shrug as he's walking off, like, what are you gonna do? Just cracked me up, and it was just there's that sort of humor threaded through this episode that's just sort of verging on dark humor, which I'm not used to in Star Wars, that I love, and it cracked me up.
Tonally, it was a little bit different, but it didn't feel, it wasn't jarring. It was kind of appropriate for what this actually was. And I saw your little laughing face. Mason has discovered on the service that we use to do these calls, the emoji button. So he's having a lot of fun with that. All right, well, very good. Let's go ahead and give our letter grade for the episode. Mason, why don't you start, pal?
My letter grade was A-.
Oh, A-. Do you want to explain your grade at all?
The first time I saw it, I was going to give it like a B-, C+. But when I watched it again, I realized, like you said earlier, how much better it was.
Cool. Was it just more funny, more exciting, or it just kind of worked better for you?
A lot of stuff I didn't notice of like how funny it was and of what Tech did in the race.
Great. Love that. All right. Jeff, what about you?
I'm going to go a step above Mason, and I'm going to give this one an A.
Okay.
And it's because this one sidestepped a lot of landmines. Because like you, Sid is not one of my favorite characters. I don't really like the character that much. I find her she kind of bores me. Because again, you just kind of get, she seems very one note. But they managed to give her some depth in this episode with the storyline, and we learn a little bit more about her backstory. We met two really great new characters that I want to see more of. And it was just a really fun episode, and we got to spend some quality time with Tech and Wrecker. And again, those are my favorites. So this one is sort of tailor-made for Jeff. And I didn't go into it expecting that. So yeah, this one gets an easy A from me.
All right. Well, I had to have a sort of a sliding scale grade. The first time I watched it, nice. The first time I watched it, Mason I've been using this app for probably 8 years on the show, and Mason is using more features than I have in 8 years combined. So
it's because I used to do Zoom calls in second grade when COVID hit, and everybody in my class always chatted and used emojis.
There you go. That's great. So initially I would have given this one probably a B-, mostly because I was like, it's fine. It's fun. It's not what I'm going to go back to. But I watched it again before this, and I found it much more charming. The color popped. I laughed more. I like the thoughtfulness of Tech. I like that even though Sid is still one of my least favorite characters, I like that they're giving her a little something to work with. And overall, that moves me to an A-. I mean, if A+ is the solitary clone, if that's the scale, they're very, very different in their own way. They're very, very, one is more serious, more cerebral, much more edgy, important themes. This one has some important themes that does make you think too, but it's also got a lot of humor. And I am of a mind, as much as I like Andor, my favorite dose of Star Wars has adventure, has action, has laughs, and it has heart. And I feel like this one hits all the right notes for me, which gives it an A-.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
All right, so that's going to do it for this week's episode of Coffee with Kenobi, looking at Faster, the fourth episode in season 2 of The Bad Batch. Jeff, please let everybody know what's going on with Marvin Dog Media and what we can look forward to and where people can find you as well.
Okay, well, as Dan said, marvindogmedia.com is a good place to find me. We're also on Twitter. I'm at Twitter at the Jeff McGee and at Marvin Dog Media. You can find Marvin Dog Media podcast wherever you go for podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, anywhere. You can find Talking Toys with Taylor and Jeff. You can find the pilot episode and the Saturday morning supercast on all of those, as well as Star Wars Splash Page, the Star Wars comic review podcast that I do with our friend Matt Moore. Our latest episode came out today, the day we're recording this, which is the 18th. And we discussed the 2 new books that came out this week, Bounty Hunters number 30 and Han Solo and Chewbacca number 9. Both really great. This Han Solo and Chewbacca series has been so much fun. If you're not reading it, I highly recommend you read it. If you want to wait till the trade comes out, that's perfectly okay. Give it 4 or 5 months and it'll be out. But again, those are all available wherever you go for podcasts. You can also find them again all at marvindogmedia.com.
Wonderful. And Mason Zehr can be found occasionally on CWK Live every Tuesday night, 7 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time. Speaking of, be sure to get your top 5 ready for Faster so you can join us next week. And hey, bring some of your family members, bring your friends. We have so much fun on the conversation, but it's even more fun when all of you are a part of it. So on behalf of myself, Mason Zehr, and Jeff McGee, thank you again, everybody. We will see you next time.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along.